So far, no one sees bothered, but you see what I've seen.
Good morning. Welcome to today's stream. It's me, your buddy Jay, and this is a extra Azure FunBytes stream that we're doing today. I'm really glad to have you watching me today. I think you're going to learn a little something about the Azure Fundamentals test that you can take to go ahead and get your certification that will bring you to what is considered competency of Azure. And so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the things that you can start doing to become competent with Azure. So more than just hearing, hey, use Azure. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look a little bit at Microsoft Learn, and I'm actually going to go and bring someone on that's actually been using it a little bit lately. And he's actually a really good friend of mine. He's from the Minneapolis area, and I'm really happy to have him part of it. So let's go ahead and bring on my buddy Mike.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Mike.
What's going on, Jay? Welcome
aboard. I know I'm playing something we both really like listening to a lot. And so I hope you're enjoying that. So before we kind of get into the technical stuff, I want to kind of introduce you to the people who are watching. Your name is Mike Giralico. You're from the Indianapolis area, but you moved up to Minneapolis, correct?
Well, Louisville, but
yeah.
Louisville.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Right. My brain wasn't working very well this morning. I really apologize for that. It's still pretty early where we both are.
Yeah, it's fine. It happens. I mean, Louisville gets overlooked.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm getting like my Midwest cities mixed up. I really apologize. So I want to talk to you a little bit about like why you kind of jumped into some of this stuff. So we have been, friends for what, about almost 20 years now?
20 sounds right.
Yeah.
Been in the business, yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we both have kind of like done is we've grown in the roles that we have over the years and have really become, part of tech in our own way. But you got hit with a little bit of a rough spot. Why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on in your life lately?
Yeah, so it had just happened. I'd primarily been a security engineer most of my career. We just brought up 20 years. I've got 18 years in the field.
Gotcha.
But December, I had kind of made a career path change, and I had switched over to sales engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Still dealt a little bit with security because I still have to know that to sell that type of product. But of course, the pandemic hit, and there were cutbacks, and 5-6 months into this new position, I find myself out on the job market with no job for the first time in 18 years. And also I'm finding, what technologies, what skills all of a sudden I need to learn about. And Azure was a thing that came up often. And I was at a point when I lost my job that all I was aware of was it was a Microsoft offering that on occasion I had to build a VPN tunnel for a customer at my business to use. And that was it. That was all I knew at the time.
I always felt that was a big sticking point for me as well when I first kind of had to move in. So I wasn't really very, very Azure proficient even when I started at Microsoft. I looked at this as like, oh, well, this is a cloud. This is like all the other clouds. There's particular offerings that you can use that make things easier for you. And so that made me say, all right, well, I mean, I know computers, I know servers, I know systems, I know networks, I know security. The only difference now is I just need to know how to do it in the way that they use it, or, use tools that are agnostic that can go ahead and make use of this platform. And so that's always been to me what I've really appreciated is that you just really need to think about how did I do this, say, on a server, like a physical machine. We got one of our regulars is, and he's got to say, looking out for work, Azure is much in demand. And one of the things that, I noticed, and especially in the world of security, is we just got that big government deal, the JEDI deal. And while I'm not the biggest fan of what it represents, I can certainly tell you that it's a big driver of people nowadays to want to learn Azure, I think, because
Yeah,
that's like government stuff, defense department, people who know and have that kind of like clearance. They're able to kind of also jump in and do the same exact thing you are.
right. And pulling from my experience with the customers I work with and looking at, as I'm going through job postings now every day, it's easily 50%, and it's probably more than that, but easily 50%. It's always something comes up about Azure, whether it's just having beginner knowledge, or I'm seeing now people are starting to actually look for, the certification for it.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is that you've started kind of like the trip that a lot of people do, and that trip is down towards certification, because I think certification makes you feel more proficient in general. Just the idea that I know a thing, and here's a piece of paper or a digital certificate that throws it out there and says, I did the work, I took the test, I know it. And I know you've done some stuff around Cisco once, correct?
Cisco and Fortinet have been where I've been certified in the past and got my start.
So I can say that my first certificates in technology were both the CompTIA and the Microsoft ones. So like I took my A plus, Net plus, Linux plus, and then I also ended up doing like all the Microsoft ones to get me like MCP proficient. And so that to me was like just a big like push in the right direction, because it told my boss like, hey, I care enough to actually go out there and do the tests and learn about it, to tell you I care about it. I care about being proficient enough to say like this is the time I've put in. And so I think those are the real benefits around certificates, especially people who are retraining. And so I want to talk a little bit now about what we're looking at lately today, and that's going to be Microsoft Learn. And so, Mike, you signed up for this recently, right?
Yeah, about 2 or 3 weeks. It's I dove right in pretty heavy the first week. I'll admit I've kind of taken a step back because speaking of certifications, I've got a test on Wednesday, so I've kind of had to drop some focus on this and focus on that. But I've been in here tearing away at it. I forget how many experience points I've built up right now. I kind of like that system, honestly, because it kind of drives me to do more. Not that the learning in and of itself isn't a big driver, but then I'm looking at those experience points. I'm like, ooh, I can grab more. And it keeps me in there longer than, other, like just going through a Cisco document to learn about VLANs for the CCNP, for example.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that you can really take from this like particular suite of skilling up services. This free service, I think, really has given people opportunities to kind of say, you know what, I've got my time. I want to learn on my time and eventually have it go somewhere. So let's kind of work together through this. All right, Mike?
All right.
So one of the things we kind of get started with in this learning path, and let me just kind of bring it back for you, Mike. There are countless roles that you, as a person skilling up, can actually go through to get those fundamentals that you need. So let's say you want to be a security engineer, the next place that you go within Azure. So say you get this AZ900, and then the next thing you want to do is go towards the security engineer. So we've got a whole learning path for you, an actual guide to the certificate, what you'll need to do. So you'll take your AZ900, and then after that, what you'll do is you'll go for this security engineer, or the AZ500. And so we've got a whole path for you. And I think that for someone like yourself who's already got those skills, all you need to do is take some of those skills and bring them over to this direction. You know what I mean?
Right.
So let's kind of get into it a little bit. And thank you again, Mike, for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. And I want everybody to know, we've got people available to, I should say we have the ability to take your questions and comments. Phil has been one of my best viewers. Thank you so much, Phil, for always watching and being part of this. And Mike, thank you. Like I said, I really wanted to spend some time with you because in this whole COVID thing, I mean, these are really the best opportunities to see one another. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I had a trip out towards you in the Minneapolis area planned sometime this summer. And the fact that went away kind of stinks. And we don't get to hang out, talk, and eat grilled cheese sandwiches and pizza. But the one thing we can do right now is just talk about this stuff. So the things that you kind of go through in AZ 900 and specifically the Azure Fundamentals learning path is talking about things like high availability, scalability, elasticity, agility, fault tolerance, and disaster recovery. And so I think high availability is pretty self-explanatory. So is scalability. Elasticity, do you know what they mean specifically about elasticity in these types of contexts?
I'm blanking on how Microsoft used it.
So, sure. So I've got this big rubber band here, right? This big rubber band, and I love using this rubber band as kind of an explanation of like what we mean by elasticity. Let's just say that this is your normal solution, your normal cloud application solution. And we can say that this normal cloud application solution remains a certain way. But let's just say that I need to get more out of this solution right now. And so what I can do with my resources are pull them apart and make them elastic and be able to do more with what I have right now. Now, eventually, I'm not going to need this much. And so what happens with something that's elastic when you release that pressure from it? It starts to shrink. Starts to go back to what you need. So you can scale out, scale in, or we can scale up and add more resources that way. So that's the way to think about elasticity is you can scale up, you can scale out, but the idea is that you can always scale back in. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the idea is for like elasticity really comes down to the idea that financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense to always be at 100%. Nothing on the internet is at 100%. If you catch what I'm going to, it's just like there will never be a solution in which a website runs at 100%. Everything is always green all the time. I think a person in your with your experience, especially around, I think you did a lot around networks, right?
Yes.
So when a network is down, I mean, it happens a lot. Switches die, but you build redundancy into that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think what we're starting to learn is that we can do a lot of these things just the same. And we think about fault tolerance and disaster recovery. So that's the other thing that the cloud really gives us that benefit is while we have that elasticity and the agility so we can move fast, build things quickly, use pipelines, we can also, in situations where things fail, fault tolerance we can build into our applications. We can use tools built into Azure to allow us. And is there a development path? Let me see what Robbie, is there a development path from web develops and Azure? Yes, absolutely. If you go here in the roles, you'll see there's a DevOps engineer, all these different types of roles that are made for you to go through the whole process of becoming skilled up. So where were we, Mike? So we talked a little bit about like fault tolerance and disaster recovery. So if something fails, we want to get it back online, right? I mean, Netflix.
Yeah.
Like Netflix is the perfect example. Like Netflix always has something down. They intentionally make sure that something on Netflix is always broken and that they're able to always be online. They do this thing called chaos engineering. And they will intentionally break systems, break networks, kill packets. They'll do all these different things. And the reason why specifically is to ensure that in the moment of a failure, we can continue to be online. And I think that that's really huge, is so that, imagine this, Mike. You've got like a big Cisco switch with like about 100 connected ports.
Right.
And randomly, someone in the data center, their job is to go and pull out the power cable from that. Now, the idea is what we want to do is make sure that pulling out the power of that network switch doesn't stop anything for our web applications or any of our applications. So if someone at Netflix goes and turns off a VM or something like that, or breaks a particular service, you should still be able to watch like the latest thing on Netflix. And so that's
Right.
why we have all these things around fault tolerance and making sure that we can survive. And then disaster recovery is essentially if something on a huge site is destroyed. So let's think about having all of your resources, say, in one data center. If that data center fails, what are you going to do? You're going to be down, right?
Right.
You're dead in the water. So what we do is we make use of services like disaster recovery so that we can spin things up back in other regions or have them fail over. So we have services like Azure Front Door. We've got load balancing, all these things that you can use to just make sure that your stuff stays online. Cool?
Yep.
So the next place is we can compare and contrast strategies for transitioning to the Azure cloud. I think one of the big things that you really learn in the early portions of AZ 900 training and the fundamentals is the idea that, and we're going to go through some of these cloud concepts as today is our big focus, all right? Because I think that right here is where you actually get that idea of what exactly Azure does for you. Like all these things are fairly more functional, but once you get into stuff like, once you get into like managing services and using compute storage, you start learning about like what to do with it. But the first thing you really need to learn is why to do it. Because I think that all training should come with a purpose. Like ultimately, what do you want to do here? You want to build things in the cloud. You want to ensure that you have the best experience based on the resources available. And then you have to define how you're going to either migrate into the cloud, because I think a lot of learning about the cloud is also learning how to bring things into it.
Right.
So you've been playing with a few programming languages here and there, right?
I've been mostly Python's been my focus.
So
that's another thing that just in this last month I've started to learn.
And Python's like a brilliant language to, I think, kind of take on because it's so functional. It's so useful. Everything from data science to web applications, you name it. You can do just about anything with Python. And so I think that's great. And there's lots and lots of things that we can use for deploying Python applications. So we'll go here to the introduction section. And so you'll see while we're going along, there's this points meter. And I think it's really cool that we gamify it for you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we get through the introduction, and it kind of just gives you the basics of like what our learning objectives is. So understanding cloud computing, the benefits, the deployment model that works for you. So real simply, cloud computing, it's like renting resources. You know what I mean? Like I've always looked at cloud computing. There's that joke, it's someone else's computer. That's all the cloud is.
Right.
But that's if somebody else's computer never went down ever, had an SLA of like 99 or service level agreement of like 99.99 blah, blah, blah %. And then if someone else's computer could literally be anywhere in the world, anytime, any place. And almost, with the amount of services that are available, there's practically data centers everywhere. We'll get into that. But, compute power ends up being really what we really look to bring into these situations. So a lot of people start with like virtual machines. And I'm sure you've built a VM on your computer to do something once before. I think a lot of us in IT have done that, whether it's using something like VMware, VirtualBox, and then there's things that are free like Vagrant. And so these are all like on-demand resources And it all depends on where you actually are using them, whether it's in the cloud or on your local computer. Like all the concepts are the same. So VMs, like I said, they're not the only computing choice, but there's more. So have you ever worked with a container or used a container before?
Yeah, I mean that was a lot. That was a lot of actually how our stuff was set up at CenturyLink for the firewalls we used. They were all everything was cloud based there.
So like Docker containers to build everything.
Right.
And so that's really one of the big things that are become a foundational part of the cloud, or Docker containers or containers in general. And the reason why is putting an entire Linux system online and then having to manage it constantly, especially all the underlying things like the patching, that's a lot of work. And so the idea with containers is that we take away a lot of that requirements for patching the underlying system. We take away a lot of the requirements for the hardware, because we're not virtualizing hardware either. And I think that that's one of the cool things. So real short, and you can tell me, Mike, if I'm telling you something you know. A VM needs a hypervisor. So like VMware or Hyper-V, it needs a thing to say, here's a virtualized computer that's fake, and all these virtualized resources. So we're actually creating like a second computer to work. And you're having to build an operating system that manages that virtual computer and all the other virtual computers that you build on that server. And so you have to manage the lower level, the actual physical hardware and the networks and all the infrastructure. Then on top of that, you've got to manage your virtual network. You've got to manage then eventually your virtual machines, and then how your hypervisor manages networks. So you're talking about a lot of stuff to do. So what a container is going to do for us is just strip out a lot of those virtualization requirements, because it's not virtualizing. That's like the big thing that I like to tell people is a VM is a virtualized computer. A container is a process on a computer. You know what I mean? So all a container does is it uses the operating system's kernel. Instead of running its own kernel, it's using all the operating system that you install's resources, rather than using a hypervisor to create the resources and then run those. So it's just extra levels that we've wiped out. Cool?
Yes.
So let's talk a little about serverless. Have you ever spent any time or heard about serverless?
Not in that terminology. Coming from ISPs, it's been a matter of especially I'm finding now, it's like I start learning about something. It's like, oh, I did that, but they had it under some branded name.
Sure. So I like to look at. Have you ever created cron jobs or automated tasks, whether it's Windows or Linux?
A few.
Okay. So sometimes you want a thing to always happen at a certain time, the same exact way as a process, and you want it to be triggered by a certain thing. So let's say that every time the clock hits 10:27 every single day, I want a certain thing to happen. So the old way that really used to happen is you would have to run these processes as just like local processes on a machine, and they would have to kick off a job and then eventually maybe run a script or something else, or maybe even curl an API to make something happen. And when I say curl an API, I mean use an HTTP call to do an action on an API via a web address. So serverless allows you to say, I want to run things like that as a trigger, and maybe every day at 3 o'clock, maybe every time somebody goes to a particular website. And what happens is on-demand computing power that's just based on a trigger. And so it's called a function. So the thing I like to think about is this. Imagine you have like a daily report. And every day that daily report runs on a number of servers, and it's processing some information, and then eventually emails that report to, say, the leaders of a particular team. So let's say we want to find out the number of like HTTP 500 calls that happened. So what we can do is then create a function that maybe collects all of our logs, produces those logs into a report, and then mails those. And then the best thing about it is that this report isn't actually happening on a physical server that we have to maintain. What we're just doing is writing code, applying that code to a function, providing a trigger of why the function and how the function works, and then eventually getting our output. So that's like a huge, huge part of the cloud right now, because this is about empowering developers. Period. Developers. They are giving us all an opportunity to build without actually having to worry about anything underneath the code. We'll let Azure completely handle the code and do this serverless or function action so that we don't have to. We don't have to run the servers. We're going to let the trigger just happen. So here are these three concepts that we kind of just talked about. So we talked about virtual machines, or that full computer in the cloud. And so this is giving us the most control over what we get in our infrastructure. We're paying attention to the physical hardware. And in this case of the physical hardware, we're not managing it ourselves. Azure's managing it. If we were in a data center solution, and we would have to manage this physical hardware, this host operating system, and this hypervisor controller. Azure says this whole bottom layer is taken care of. You just worry about this part. And so then the next part is containers. So we're going to take a step down. Each step down here in this, these little stairs, represents the less amount of overhead that you as an administrator or a security person, network person, you name it, the least amount of requirements that you have, less overhead. So you can basically say, I want to offload this hypervisor controller thing. I don't want to build things off a hypervisor. I don't need a full OS to manage. I don't need to do the virtual hardware. I just need my process to run. So now we move to a container. And we have that ability to build really, really rich applications because we can link containers together, have them all into microservices. You ever heard of a microservice, Mike?
Yes.
So a small service that does a specific thing that's a part of our larger application. So maybe one of our microservices just handles reports from the database, and then another microservice takes those reports and then processes them into a web app or a web presentable version. So that's where we go. And now the furthest down the line in our steps is serverless. And like I said, this is the least amount of responsibility you as a developer would have, and as an operations person or even network engineer, security engineer, these are just ensuring that the functions are secure, that they don't leak any data that you don't want leaked in the process. So your API is reduced to only the function you want to commit. And then you just commit these things to code and then upload them whatever way you do. So I think that these are the basis. This is the foundation of the fundamentals, the actual hardware we run everything on. And so then the same thing with storage. Storage is another fundamental foundational product. And so do you ever have to build a RAID array?
I never had to do that in mine. I always had, that was another team, and I'd have to work with them after.
So years and years ago, I worked for this really, really big hosting company, and thousands and thousands of servers and customers and stuff like that. And one of the big things that you always had to deal with working in physical server solutions was building RAID arrays. And it wasn't always just telling the data center team, pop in some disks and hit the button. There's read back cache, there's write back cache, there's all these things that you have to configure. There's getting batteries inserted and making sure that the battery power is working so that you do these caches so that if a computer crashes in the middle of writing a transaction, you don't lose any of that data. And then redundancy was the other big part of the RAID, and knowing what RAID level to have, because certain RAID levels are more costly when it comes to process time. It'll take longer to actually do something as opposed to another RAID. So a RAID 10 has a different type than a RAID 5 and a RAID 1. And so all of this required you to learn a lot of information. And not only that, but also You needed to be aware of whether your storage was full. If your storage was degraded, well, one of the machines had a disk fail, and then you would have to send someone to go and replace it. So what managed storage in something like the cloud does is basically says all of your hard drives are virtualized, and you can plug your hard drives into these virtual computers like VMs. But then you can also attach storage to containers. You can attach storage via like a file share. So if you've got, say, 30 Linux computers or 30 Windows computers, and they all need to access the same file share to complete a process, you can hook them all up using an SMB mount, or in Linux it's called a Samba mount. And that allows you to connect this huge network file system over the protocol NFS, network file system. And so now you're able to put all that, and all these computers can share it. And it looks like a hard drive. That's all it looks like. It doesn't look like a share. It's just mounted as a hard drive, and you can do what you want. And everybody can do it at the same time. It's all consistent, and everybody will always be able to get what they need, depending on the application they're using. The other cool storage things, have you ever heard of the term object storage?
Yes.
So what do you know about object storage?
I mean, that's just your individual piece. Like you don't have to necessarily store the entire database or the entire program out there. You can just install
pieces. Just the pieces.
Yeah, your pieces.
So like an object is any kind of, say, unstructured data. And when I say data, I mean anything. A picture is an unstructured thing. It's just a photograph, a video, anything that you might want to serve in, say, like a web application, or maybe you want to have logs stored in a place for really, really inexpensive. So there are a lot of different offerings in storage. So you can use things like blob containers, and you can put thousands and thousands or more images or any type of file, and they'll all get an HTTPS hostname. They'll all be online. You can actually make them expire. You can send them to people and only have them have access to a little bit of time. But the reason why you would want to use this is that this storage is highly, highly available. So this storage won't go down based on the SLA, the service level agreement. And so your really, really important files, you'll always keep there, and you'll say, okay, based on our redundancy, we're never going to lose it. All right, so we're just about done with this album. What do you want to listen to next, Mike?
We can stick with Avail.
I got an idea. How about the victory style comps?
All right.
So Mike and I, we met, and just to take a quick diversion, because we got to keep this people-like. So I'm going to just close this for a sec. We'll put on some music, and we'll just talk for a second and get it back to a people moment. Mike and I met on a message board related to punk rock and hardcore music, I guess in like the very mid-90s. Like, so maybe like 94, 95, right?
Probably a little bit later than that. I really wasn't on the internet till 98. So
okay. Probably 98, 99. And so a lot of what we did back then was just basically BS and talk about music, our individual like scenes. Oh, you can't hear my music on the public side. Weird. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's too low.
Yeah. Now I can hear it.
Okay. What do you think? You can hear? Okay, thanks, Phil. Yeah, I had it low so we wouldn't blow each other out there. Anyway, so we met in this like incredible like music scene at a really, really early time where the internet was probably one of the earliest big drivers of I guess our music scene and our communities that we had in a long time.
Well, and I know we always joke that punk rock kids especially took to the internet really fast because it was a digitized version of how we operated anyway.
Absolutely.
We were all already networked. I mean, we were the original sneaker net. It was, there's this new band. Well, I'm coming into town here. I made this copy of their demo.
Or there was things like this, like, we would meet each other in the context of online, and then be able to bring our communities together even more in person, because that was kind of what we were able to do. We were able to use like that kind of DIY ethic of saying I can do it myself. And I think that that's what I've really found interesting about the world of like open source technology and the cloud. Um, you know, so Phil, we just want to say this was like a huge part of what we did too. Like mixtapes was so huge in what we did. Like I think at one point we actually had like mixtape trading on the website that we were on, and that was like such a huge way of us getting to know each other. And I almost look at that as very close to people using open source code, building something, sharing it with somebody else, because I got this, I got that, I want you to use it too, I want to share it with you. And I thought that that was like a really cool part. Like we already had the idea of we can do all this on our own. We don't need bigger, large industries to teach us how to make our own records. We don't need these huge companies to teach us how to put on our own concerts. We can do this ourselves. And I think that what we saw with open source is that we don't need huge entities to write the code for us and close it. We can use open source code. We can write things ourselves. We can share what we've written, and then we can bring communities together. So I'm going to lower this a little. I love Snapcase, but I want us to be able to kind of move forward a bit. Yeah, I saw
Snapcase is always louder than everybody else.
Yeah, I saw Snapcase the last time, I think was at the infamous show at where was it? Webster Hall, where Harley Flanagan got stabbed.
Stabbing.
Yeah, that was the last time we saw Snapcase.
The last time I saw them was 2002 or 2003 at one of the final Crazy Fest that Initial still put on.
Yeah. What I will say though is that a lot of the hardcore music festivals have really been able to give like some of us older people the opportunity to see these bands that we saw years and years ago. And some of them are not completely washed up, which has really been cool. Anyhow, let's get a little bit, and we're getting through here. Just this like first opening space of talking about Azure Fundamentals, and I think that you're just getting us walking you through the very, very beginning. This is unit 3 of 10, and this is just one unit that makes up the entire learning path. So benefits of cost computing. And I think that this is like the cost-effective thing was the thing that they taught me on the very, very first day of cloud. You know what I mean? Like day one of cloud says, we don't have to buy servers. We don't have to buy the data center. We don't have to maintain the data center. All you have to do is put a credit card in. So that was like the hugest benefit.
Yeah, you just put that in and just pay for what you need. You don't have to pay for, 8,000 servers and all this, all these processors and everything. It's just, well, I'm just starting this, so I'm only really going to need a little bit. So I just pay for this little bit. I pay for one container maybe.
Yeah, so we're not doing that whole huge capital expenditure of upfront, like right here, the upfront infrastructure costs, the no need to purchase this stuff. Also, that means less contracts to manage. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the idea that there were so many contracts to manage around IT acquisition that it became one of those things that nobody really wanted to deal with, is going to the vendor and buying 100 servers and then having support plans around those 100 servers so that your vendor could come and fix a broken a field replaceable unit, I think is what it was called, an FRU. Now we're getting into like real old school terms. And also, shadow IT, obviously, like people doing things outside of the norm within the organization, taking on cloud to offset some of their overhead, definitely made a big deal. It's scalable. I think we talked a little bit about that before. So that elasticity, that scale,
Right.
that's obviously the biggest part of this. And that really helps the portion we were just talking about, the costs. So when we need to grow, we're certainly not going to buy another 100 servers and get them there tomorrow. And you remember that old term, the slash dot effect?
Oh, yes. Man, I haven't heard that in years.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what the slash dot effect is, there's this website.
I guess the closest thing would be your what you used for your subject for some of your talks about the dress.
Oh, the dress. Yeah. So when I worked at BuzzFeed, we had this thing. It was a dress. Nobody knew what color it was. The dress, BuzzFeed. And what we really had, one of my great coworkers, Kate Holderness, she was able to come up with this really brilliant post. Nobody could tell what color the dress is. And then all these years later, I think there have been millions and millions. Yeah, here, all these votes. and so what happened was when everybody came to the website at the same time, it took it down. And so in like the late 90s, early 2000s, this website was one of the biggest websites in technology. It predates Hacker News. I would say it's been around as long as Reddit and a few other those types of places. And when you got linked on here and you didn't have the proper reliability and availability of whatever it is you're got slashed on it, it would go down, just gone. And so that was one of the biggest visible reasons that the old ways of managing infrastructure just simply weren't working anymore. And so the scalable idea of the cloud, growing, shrinking, adding more, doing it vertically would be maybe just going from like a server with, 16 gigs of RAM to 32 gigs of RAM, and then going horizontal, maybe instead of adding more RAM, but adding more servers with 16 gigs of RAM. So now instead of just having one machine with 32 gigs of RAM, we have, say, 4 machines with 16 gigs of RAM, and they spread out the load of the application. So we're looking to be able to do this scalability thing to grow as we need and do it without having to spend a ton of money. And then, of course, this elasticity. And we just talked about it, the giant rubber band, the idea that either you grow, you shrink, but the fact is you're growing and you're shrinking within the same rubber band. You don't need to buy a new rubber band every single time. It's not necessary. You're elastic, and that's what Azure provides you. Elasticity in the cloud to grow and shrink as you need, and right here, minimize cost. Right.
That's the driving force.
So this I really love, and these two actually I think are really built into one another. It's current. When you're working with tools, you want the latest, the greatest, the bleeding edge, but you also want patch levels. So you don't want to necessarily have to constantly worry about patch levels. Sometimes you want to have your vendor just take care of them, especially when you talk about CVEs, critical vulnerabilities that hit 0 day. And let's say it's hitting a 0 day on a Linux version that you're using, or maybe you don't want to manage those big problems and you'd rather have those updates be pushed by Azure. That's what you can do. So the hardware, all managed by the provider, a lot of the software managed by the provider. You can choose to manage some of it, or you can offset those. And then the reliability was what we were talking about before. There's data centers all over the world. Those data centers are spread out in different ways all across the globe. And then those data centers are broken up into what are known as, and those data centers are in regions. Those regions are located all over the globe. So there's one, say, Germany, there's one in the United States. And then we have some other clouds that we provide, like China, and then some Europe stuff related to government. So there are all these like different regions and sectors that we have for different purposes or different locations. And then within those, there are availability zones. Did you pick up availability zones yet?
I went over it a little bit, just really the first day I was in there. It's not come back up. I mean, I know there's the different, you've obviously got your 5.9 ones.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember right now.
Well, I'll show you availability zones. So I want to show you availability zones is pretty much a common thing within a lot of the like clouds. It's basically, so you have regions, and so a region is a set of data centers. So almost every region contains 3 data centers. So there's at least one, but most of the major regions, they have at least 3 availability zones, which means within that particular area, say, and so we go availability zones. Within those availability zones make up 3 independent data centers with their own power, their own air conditioning, their own security. And because of that, we're able to ensure that if we need an application running out of, say, Germany or running out of the East US, and there are 3 availability zones, we actually have it where those 3 data centers are actually hosting our application. We can spread across the 3 availability zones. So if one were to fail, it wouldn't matter. The other 2 would act as fault domains, and you would have a fault-tolerant application. So if it fails, it'll come back on. So that's the big part of the reliability. I think that as you continue to learn about Azure, you'll see those availability zones become something that you lean to make sure that if something were to go down, it will come back up, or it wouldn't ever go back down because the other portions of the application would still be online.
Your high availability, your HA.
Exactly. Secure. I think someone like you can just lean into me and tell me, what does security mean for people nowadays?
I mean, it's your protection of really everything, especially now that you've moved into things like ransomware that are out there. It's everything, because before, you could fly by the seat of your pants and just be like, well, we had everyone set a password. No, it's not just that anymore. There's all kinds of ways to get in, through phishing, through Trojan horses, through everything. Somebody's going to get in there and get at your data. Maybe they just want your data, or maybe, like I already brought up ransomware, maybe they just think they can hold you hostage and get money out of you. They don't necessarily really want your data. They just want your money. So,
yeah. And that's been the interesting thing, is that these things like Bitcoin miners have ended up becoming something that end up getting put into containers. So let's say this, you have like a JavaScript application, and that JavaScript application has a dependency. And in that dependency, someone went into the NPM package and put a Bitcoin miner in it. And so then that gets packaged into your container and then ends up in every single one of your application servers or containers. And then you're going and you're actively trying to run your app, but at the same time, maybe there's a Bitcoin miner in your actual CSS or something like that runs on your customer's clients in their browser. So they're doing Bitcoin mining for this third party that you have no clue who they are. And it's only because you used a dependency maybe to render some fonts a different way. So Azure has security services that will actually scan inside of your container and say, you know what, you have a dependency that is vulnerable. We're going to let you deploy this, but we're going to tell you better fix this because it's only going to make things worse. So there's the security center, which is huge, and that's for application security. But then there's things like physical security, which I know huge part. Nobody wants to hire for their web application a bunch of security guards to watch a giant cold computer room. What they want to do is write code. And so what we're doing here is telling you write your code. We'll manage it for you. We'll give you a place to stick your stuff. Sound good?
Yeah. So
effectively, cloud computing is, and specifically cloud and Azure, is all about making things easier, faster, and more than anything, provide you with an environment that makes sense. If you don't need a ton, You don't have to use a ton. You only need to build something like a simple HTML website. You can use Azure Storage, just simple storage, and use one of those blob containers that do our object storage. We could turn that into a website host, and then we can run a very, very simple website. Like maybe you want to build a resume site, and you want to do it in HTML using a static site generator. Like you can host that site for like $1 a month. You know what I mean? And that could be huge for you if you're able to offset your costs and run something that you need a lot of people to see.
Isn't that one of the first labs in this, or maybe it was part of the path I took?
Yeah. You can go right into something like here. You can go here into, we'll show you. And so let's go over that really quick, and we'll keep going. We really haven't done anything functional today, or like we've just kind of gone over concepts. So I guess we might as well do one functional thing, okay?
All right.
So you want to walk me through this? I'm going to just talk you through what we're going to do here, okay? So this was actually part of a recent episode we did maybe like 2 weeks ago about storage. And so I've got this website, and you know Rico pretty well. Rico is my pug. So if we go here to GitHub, I've got this website. Let's go. And so this is just a static site generator. And a static site generator website that literally is just a website about Rico. It's this Hugo blog. If you want to download Hugo, it's super, super simple to work with. And so what we do here is we go into these like really simple markdown files. And let me bring this down because that's just the terminal. And you can see like we can write these really rich website pages using Markdown, which is just a very, very simple language. And then what we can do is this. So we're in here, this page, right? What we can do is just type Hugo, and it goes ahead and will build the pages in. So it'll take the pages that are here and then move them here into public. And if you look here in blog, pugfacts, index.html. So it basically took this markdown, which is just a simple language. We have all the information about like the actual page, and then it turns it into this. So that's what this just did. It converted everything, and if we wanted to look at it locally, we can just type Hugo serve, and it's going to bring up a local web server for us to check our website. So I can just go to this localhost 1313. And so this is running on my computer now, right? So it's got the blog about an update on Rico. He was sick. Now he's better. So I'm running this on my computer, and I can stop it by this. But I want to put it on the internet, right? And so we talked about how you can save things to blob storage. And so what we can do right here is go to deploy to static website, right? So we click that right here in VS Code. And we're going to use my subscription. This is where money gets drawn down from my account. As you go through Azure Fundamentals, you'll start learning more about how the subscriptions work, governance, about separating subscriptions. There's tons of stuff out there. So now we have to select a storage account. And I think what we're going to do is create a new one, a new place to host our website. And so we're going to give it a name. We'll just call it Rico Pug Info, right? It's just a unique name. We'll hit enter. We're going to create a resource group to keep it, because in Azure, everything is a resource. Everything belongs to a resource group. So think about it like a box. We need to put our stuff in a box, and we have other boxes, and we could move our resources from our main box to another box. And if we want to get rid of the box and delete everything, we could just go ahead and throw the box away in one command. And we'll show you how to do that in a second. So we're going to create the resource group where everything is going to live. We're going to say, would you like to enable static website hosting? Yes. The index page is right here for public. And if you look in there's an indexed HTML file where everything gets loaded. So our default document. This is where our 404 is. If I actually have a 404 page, and we'll look in here, I don't have a 404 page. No, I do. So we have 404.html. So I can actually make sure that if someone goes to a 404, that they get to that 404.html page. Then we pick where we're going to host it. If, let's say, I am based out of Europe. Have you ever heard of GDPR?
Yes.
That was the rule that said certain, like it's a data protection rule for consumers. And what it says in some cases that if you build an application in the European region, that all of the data, everything must remain in that region. So if I have an application and I still work with U.S. customers, but the data has to be in, you're going to put that data in another region in Europe. So in this case, we don't need that. We're just going to use East US. So it's going to use the East US data center region. So right now what we see here is it's creating the storage account, and we can look at all the things. So this is based on an extension built here into Visual Studio Code. VS Code is free to use. You download it, you get it anytime. And then what you'll do is you'll go here into extensions. You'll look for the Azure Storage extension right here. We just install it. You'll have to use this Azure account. And what you'll basically do is it'll allow you to log into your Azure account and manipulate resources. So what we just did was that. And our deployment of our website is done. Rico's website is already online. And if we just go here and click Browse to Website, we have a fully qualified domain name. It's HTTPS, so it's secure. And it's ready and it's online. I can just go here. And if I want to make a change, so let's go ahead and make a change, right? So we'll go back to Rico update, right? Rico is better. He's great. We'll just say he feels really well. We love him, right?
Yes.
Save this. So now we're going to convert that into a static page. We'll just type Hugo. And then so now it's generating the pages and the change. And now we do Hugo minus D. And that's actually going to export that into that HTML. So we do that. Now we have HTML. And so if you look in here, ls minus al. Oh, wait, I'm in PowerShell, not Bash. So we go into public. We'll see there's our index.html. And if we go into blog, we'll just do it here.
While you bring that up about the shell and whatnot, I just want to kind of point out, not sure the expertise level or background of everybody on the call listening to this today, but for me coming in there, we brought up earlier, like I just started learning Python within the last month, like done zero coding in my life. Like I've done Linux command line stuff. So, as I got to the first couple of labs in here, I was starting to sweat for a second because it's like, you're going to choose this and code. And I was like, whoa, wait. But as you go through the labs, it'll give you the info on what you need for that. I mean, if it was me right this moment, got thrown into a real world situation, I myself would have to dive into Google and verify the commands. But while you're learning this, it's really awesome. It'll show you like, hey, like, here's the commands you got to use. And it gives you a little breakdown of what it is. It's not just straight like, dump this code in there. It's
They're real.
Why?
They're real applications with real world scenarios that let you use these codes within Learn. That I think is great. So you ready to publish our new change?
Yes.
So I went ahead and I committed it to Git, just so any changes I make to the blog are always in Git. And like I said, like Hugo minus D, which output all of our HTML pages. And so now all we have to do is go here to public again, right click, deploy to static website, use all the same stuff that we just did. So Rico Pug info, and what it's going to say is it wants to know if I want to delete everything that's already in there and replace it. And I'll be honest with you, yes, all the changes, I want them all in. So this is the easiest type of deployment on Azure. It's right click to deploy. It is not very DevOps, but it is a foundational and easy way to actually put something on Azure. And so now we've got this, and I want to show you. So like I said, if we go to our website, we'll see it's up. We'll go to the blog, update on Rico. Yep, see, there are changes that we just made. Now, here's the thing I want to show you, Mike, that I think that it'll wrap everything together if you want, if you get it, okay?
Yeah.
So we'll go to home. We'll go to the portal. I love this song. I love Bloodlet. They're so incredible. All right, so now we'll go to resource groups. We're going to go to the resource. So I have all these different subscriptions because I work at Microsoft. That means I get lots and lots of access to lots and lots of stuff.
All the toys.
So here's what we created here, Rico Pug Info, right? This is the resource group. And then this is the individual resource. And there's not a lot going on here, right? Very, very simple. So then we go ahead and we click Rico Pug Info, which is the storage account that we created. And then we go here to containers. So all this got done for us. We didn't have to go and create, point, click, or even use our CLI, because we can build things for Azure here. We can build them here in the CLI and Cloud Shell. Or we can even use things like ARM templates. And as you go through the Azure Fundamentals, you'll learn more about Azure Resource Manager and the templates to build things within Azure using that. So let's go to the next part that I was talking about, Mike. You see right here, containers?
Right.
So that's what Azure created for us. And you can see within the containers, it created 2 directories. And if we go in a web, this is where our all of our content from that static site got put. And if you look here, there's our index.html. So it's here in the blob. We could download the individual file if we wanted to. We could actually acquire a lease to reduce how long people have access to it. There are even ways to change files, so we can go and edit. And I wouldn't do this, but let's say you're on the go, you got to make a change. You can make a modification to the file directly within the storage browser. Got it?
Right.
So, and when you want to find out more about it, you can go back here, logs. You want to process your logs into something. There's no log quite yet because it hasn't been online long enough. But after a little while, it'll start generating logs. And then you can take those logs, put them through, say, processing, get information about who's been to your website lately, find out if there's been errors, maybe look for bots and block them. And so what we can do, and I'll just bring it back down to the very container level, is you'll see we've got right here the static website. And so here's where all those things that we put into a virtual Visual Studio Code, here's where it all is right there. And if we at one point want to turn the website off, just do that and then save it. Now, have you learned how to do deletes yet, Mike? Like of a resource group.
Yeah, I don't think I've done that yet.
So there's 2 ways that I could tell you that are like brain dead easy, that you can just start deleting things when you're done with them. Because one of the big things that we always say is it's on demand. That means every minute something's online, it's drawing down spend.
Right.
And when we're done using these resources, even just in the case of a demo or a short proof of concept, or even when we're done with a particular application, we can either just go right here, delete the resource group. It's like almost anything on the internet. You have to confirm it. So this is like a second factor in the authentication process of saying, yes, I want to delete it. But then there's another way. We can do it via command line. We can even create an Azure function to do it. But what I'll show you is the easiest way right now. So we're going to go here, at least the easiest way I like doing it. So we can go here into our terminal in the built into Azure called the Cloud Shell. Let me just restart it. And so we can use this, or you can use just your straight up Windows terminal or your Mac terminal. As long as you have this app installed, AZ, it is the Azure CLI. It is the command line tool that lets you manipulate anything on Azure. You want to build something, delete something, edit something. You can do it all through this command line. And I don't know about you. I'm really super used to making changes via terminal, via command line. Maybe it's just the Linux person in me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when I came in and really started learning this stuff, a lot of stuff had transitioned to GUI, so I'm a GUI guy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that what I try to do is make sure I keep sharp on both sides. So
Right.
understand how to do it in the GUI, understand how to do it in the actual terminal, get an idea how to do it also via API calls, understand how to do it via the Azure Resource Manager template, and in that case, it's just you declaratively state all the stuff you want, and then it'll go through each step, do it in the order you want. It'll be idempotent. So if something already exists, it won't try to recreate it. It won't try to modify what you've already got. It'll just do the commands that you've actually, or I should say the resource management and creation, editing, delete that you asked for. So if you rerun a stack and you want to modify a portion of it, that'll be part of it. All really, really useful. I don't know why this is taking so long. It might be just something silly. I'm going to just use my Windows terminal. And what's really great is Virtual Studio Code has this terminal in it as well. So I can run the command right here in Visual Studio Code really, really simply. So I want to delete that resource group, this one right here. Like I said, I can do it via the GUI, or I can just right-click the name and then write this simple command. So Azure CLI commands, well, the Cloud Shell finally came up. So if I was doing this on my local computer, first thing I would do is do AZ login. That will log me into Azure in the shell. So what it will do is if I'm not already logged in, it will bring up a browser. The browser will eventually give you an authentication method and say, you want to log into Azure. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Rico will absolutely get a cookie. Don't worry. And so AZ login, it logs you in. Now, one of the things that's great about this Cloud Shell is that, so here's the part where AZ login on my local, right here, it's asking me to authenticate here in a browser. So now I'm logged into Microsoft Azure. And so that means I can do things here in this PowerShell window. What we could also do is, because we're authenticated, we could do it right here in Visual Studio Code in the terminal section. So I'm done with this Rico and update page. So I'm going to do AZ group. And so AZ group just allows you to invoke any function within the group command. And you can see there's all these subcommands of AZ group. And now we can see right there is delete. So AZ group, delete. And so what next? So now it's going to say, well, yeah, you want to delete something. What the hell do you want to delete? And so what we're going to do is say name, or we could just do -n, or we can name the resource group. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. And so we're going to say the name is this. Excuse me. Let me go back to the portal. It's this resource group, so that we're going to be deleting. The one that we were going to try to do with the portal. This one right here, this Rico Pug info. So we'll just copy it. And we'll go over here in the same, so we can just do all of our work in VS Code. And what we'll do is we'll just give the name, and then I'm going to just hit enter. So much like that other process before, it's just going to ask me, are you sure? It does the same thing here. So if we accidentally put the wrong name or something like that, we at least can get a second chance. Or the other thing we can do is just add -y if we definitely are no. And that'll automatically give us the yes. And so what will happen in the background is now it will make an API call to the Azure Resource Manager, which is this control plane for everything. Everything in Azure goes through Azure Resource Manager. You'll learn more about that in the rest of AZ900's fundamental training. And so now what's going to happen in the background is you're just going to have that resource deleted. And so after just a minute or two, you'll see that resource go away once it's completely finished deleting. The other part of using Resource Manager is we can also get information about individual resource groups. So we can say AZ group list We can change the output so it's in, like, say, a table, but we also have the opportunity to put it in JSON, XML. So all these different ways if we want to actually have this information processed somewhere into another format. And so now this is how I can see all of my current resource groups. And actually, we get information on what the status is of the one that we just put over here to delete. And we can see it says deleted. So I think that's really it for today, Mike. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we've done a good, dive into the very beginning of it, especially for someone like me that's just a beginner. Where, I'm still scratching the surface on what to learn on all this. But as I put up at the beginning, I went from just being like, oh, Azure's that cloud thing, we'll build a tunnel to it for you. To now I'm at least educated a bit. I'd be like, you've got things you can put out there. You can put everything you're using out there. You can put part of what you're using out there. You can secure it. If for whatever reason you don't want to secure it, you can do that. You've got choices.
Well, Mike, I hope you go and take that AZ900 once you've finished up your training. When you do, I hope we can do another one of these again and maybe pick another subject to kind of talk about. I think we'll be past fundamentals for you. Maybe we can talk about building an application. Maybe we could talk about deployment, maybe DevOps, all these different skills that once you get your initial fundamentals in, that you can take that next step. One of the things I really recommend also is after you finish AZ900, there's AZ104, which is a certified administrator. So you have your fundamental certification, and then you can go to your certified administrator, which is just another test that shows that, sure, you know the fundamentals, but let's start talking about architecture. Let's start talking about redundancy, reliability, SRE concepts, DevOps concepts. So all these other things that help you extend what you've already built.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key anyway. And I mean, it applies to this as much as it applies to anything in our field. I mean, yeah, you can go learn, I could sit here and just knock out fundamentals and be like, yep, I know what Azure is, and just stop learning. But then, okay, what? Everybody else is going to pass me by. I might get a job, but then I'm going to be worthless at it because I didn't bother to actually learn it past, what it is.
Yep.
I mean, plus, this thing's not going to stay static either. There's going to be changes in not only how it works, but what it can do for you.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing is that you need to learn not just what you can use, but the right way to use it, because a lot of people like to look at the cloud like a data center. And I always say, like, you don't want to build the cloud like a data center because it'll cost you too much. Doing one-to-one on lift and shifts, like, you can make the change of lift and shift, but then you should eventually adjust it to use cloud specific methods of deployment. So you won't need always a full virtual machine. You can use a container. You won't always need to build your own database service, your own database server. You can use a database as a service like Cosmos DB or SQL or whatever. We have managed services. And so you start to learn that the cloud isn't just about throwing things away from the data center. It's about using more efficient skill sets, more efficient tools to build things faster and to feel more confident about it.
Right.
Hey, Mike, let's finish up with this Damnation song. I'm going to say goodbye to you, and then I'm just going to close out today's stream. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike.
Thanks for having me, man.
Mike, how can everybody get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I didn't put my full name on here, but if you want to find me on LinkedIn, my last name, Giralico.
I put it in our chat, and let me get your LinkedIn address also. And I'm going to leave that so that if anybody wants to follow up, maybe they want to partner with you on another session. Maybe you can work together with somebody, or even if you just want to talk to Mike about what he's up to and what he's going to be doing next. He's a lot like a lot of you, where we're all just kind of trying to find the next best way to skill up, be part of something. And so I really appreciate you kind of taking a little bit of that journey with us. This is Mike's location on LinkedIn. And then I want to give everybody one more link. If you watched today, you saw that we went through some of the early stuff around Azure Fundamentals. And the two things that I think will really help you, there's the streaming link right there at the bottom with a location to $200 in free Azure. But I'll put this link also in our chat. Let me go ahead and put it in there. So this is for $200 in free Azure credit in our chat. And then today's course that we went over, module that we went over, I'm going to give that to everybody right now as well. But what I'm going to do, Mike, is say goodbye to you. Thank you so much. And I'll catch you somewhere on the flip-flop. All right?
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. All right. So that was great having Mike part of today's stream. It was really, really awesome. He's someone that I really appreciate, just being, someone to explain to us how you can use these free trainings, these skill sets, and not only that, but then eventually get your certification, so that you can tell everyone, I did it. One other thing I'll show you that you get from that process, let me go to my LinkedIn. I want to show you what actually happens after you take the test. So not only do you get the actual certified completion, but you can go into your LinkedIn, and I'll show you right here. Let me bring it up. I didn't want to just do all this scrolling with you watching. I thought it was kind of unnecessary. But here, let me bring this up. You're going to get some annoying recursion for a second. I really, really do apologize for that. So let me go back to here for a second. So if you go here into LinkedIn and you go over to your skills and endorsements and your certifications, what you can see is you actually get a certification list on your LinkedIn. So when you're starting to look for a new career, or you want to just add this to your credentials, you'll see right here, like I said, it's a link to this, but I'll go back to that section. And you can go to See Credential, and it's a link to your credentials. It actually shows that you passed. So you'll go here, and they'll tell you all the criteria that you met in order to pass. So I think that's extremely useful to learn about when you're getting started. So that's it for today. I think it was a fun stream. I really, really enjoyed having you all kind of learn in public with me and with Mike. Mike is a super great person that I feel really, really glad he got to spend some time with me and really just show me the things that he's doing. So I'm going to finish up the stream. I'm really thankful that you took some time with me today. And I'm going to remind you, the regular stream will be on Thursday. Thursday will be a show on the cloud show. So we just touched on the cloud show a little bit today, but I believe what we'll do a little bit more on Wednesday is, or I should say Thursday, 2 p.m. EDT. Stephen Murkowski, who is a dynamo at this operations stuff around Azure, will be joining me. We'll talk about the cloud shell. We'll talk about getting started and more Azure fundamentals, more Azure FunBytes. Thanks a lot for joining me today. We'll catch you next time. Okay. Peace.